Have you ever thought about all the things you buy that your ancestors wouldn't have spent a penny on, and how expensive modern life is in some ways compared to how people used to live? In this video from History Calling, I'm going to take you through 10 things we waste money on that our ancestors didn't, and maybe even inspire you to cut back on your own spending in some of these areas. Stay till the end, and as a bonus, I'll tell you one thing that a lot of our ancestors were paying for that most of us don't today. Before we start, just let me say that I'm choosing 10 things for this list because it's a nice round number and it makes the video a manageable length for me to make and for you to watch. However, there are absolutely more than 10 things that we spend on that people never used to, and so I invite you to share any others that you think of in the comments section below. Also, as there are 10 different topics in this episode, each of which could easily support a video all by itself, this is just going to be a quick look at them, so please don't jump down my throat for not providing an in-depth video essay on every single one. This is really designed to be a bit of lighthearted fun. Number 1. Modern technology. I'm going to start with one big group of items, because if I went through them all individually, then that would be the whole list and then some, and I think that would be cheating. I'm talking about all the modern technology that you're probably using on a daily or near daily basis, including what you're watching this video on. That's TVs, computers, phones, cameras, cars, because even petrol-fueled cars still use batteries, remember, electric lights, refrigerators, electric cookers, etc., etc. Really, it's absolutely everything that runs on electricity, whether that's mains power or batteries. Forget it all. Prior to the 19th century, mains electricity wasn't available and our ancestors weren't paying for it, and even in the late 19th century it was a rarity. This also meant that they weren't paying for things like car insurance, petrol, parking fees, TV licenses, light bulbs, and of course electricity bills. Instead, they travelled by foot or horse, and they could store food outdoors or in special cold rooms to keep it fresh for longer, or salt in some cases. Ice houses were a thing too, to keep ice in, as the name implies, and the type of foods one ate would be more seasonal. If it was fresh and couldn't be stored, then you typically couldn't have it during the period of the year when it wasn't growing. Now you might say, and you'd be right, that it simply isn't possible to exist in the modern world without most, if not all of this stuff, unless you're part of an Amazon rainforest tribe or you're strict Amish or the like, and you'd be right. However, there are some aspects of modern technology which I think we could do without, or at least with a lot less of, because they've really only come into our lives in the past 30 years or so, and I don't just mean mobile phones. No, what I'm talking about are number 2, subscription services. This covers everything from Netflix to home food deliveries, and most of these services are very recent, like they weren't around when I was a kid in the 90s, or if they were, it was considered a real treat to use them. To this day, I have never had my shopping from the supermarket delivered or used Deliveroo, and only very rarely do I get a takeout delivered. In fact, only if I'm with friends and they want to get something like a Domino's and no one can be bothered driving out to get it. This is just not something I have to budget for, and I'm quite happy with that. That's not to say I wouldn't miss my subscription services if they all disappeared though, and of course I'm aware that I run a Patreon site which is itself a subscription service, so it's not in my best interests to rag on them too much. But most services that fall into this category are comparatively new, and I do resent the fact that to watch a lot of movies or TV shows now, you seem to need about 4 different things like Netflix, Prime, Disney, Paramount, etc. And then they'll sometimes remove your favourite shows or films from their service anyway. I'm definitely hanging on to my old DVD collection, as I at least get to keep the films that way, and I've even still got some really old videos lying around the house. For the kids among us who are now lost, DVDs came before streaming and videos came before DVDs. Don't say History Calling never taught you anything. Number 3. Travel. Now, of course our ancestors travelled, but until the mid-20th century it was an expensive, slow and cumbersome business to go any great distance away from one's home, and a lot of people who did it were doing it not for fun, but to emigrate, so it was a one-way ticket to a new home. By the by, if your ancestors emigrated out of Ireland and you're looking to trace their history, you might be interested in my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon, and which I'll leave linked below for you. It actually has a whole chapter on helping you trace emigration records in countries like the US and Australia. Anyway, there were no train services or cars before the 19th century, and 19th century cars weren't going to get you anywhere fast or in any great comfort, and there were no planes before the 20th, with commercial air travel really only becoming popular in the middle of that century. Instead, you would have to go by foot, horse, including carriages, or boats, and travelling by sea in particular was a dangerous gamble. Even crossing narrow bodies of water like the Irish Sea, which is what you're looking at here, or the English Channel, could be lethal if bad weather appeared. Overseas trips like the Grand Tour that young European men used to go on to complete their education were a rarity reserved for the wealthy, and they lasted months or even a year or more. The concept of a foreign summer holiday for a week or two and maybe a little city break here and there simply didn't exist yet. And even as commercial travel took off, and that pun is intended, it still remained out of reach for most. A plane ticket from London to Amsterdam in 1951 on British European Airways cost $14, for instance. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $600 today for a one-way flight between two countries that are not really that far apart. Needless to say, other than the wealthy, a lot of people just didn't prioritise foreign travel in the way that they do today, and so they didn't have that expenditure to budget for. My paternal grandparents, for instance, never left the British Isles at all, and on my mother's side, if we exclude my grandfather's war service, because fighting the Nazis can hardly be called a holiday, they didn't leave the British Isles either until the 1970s when they went to Majorca. Number 4. Personal grooming. I'm going to have this cover everything from plastic surgery and other cosmetic procedures, to expensive haircuts and colours, to makeup, getting one's nails done, wearing perfume, and many hair removal procedures like electrolysis and getting a professional wax. Although, there is a funny scene in the TV show Outlander during season 2 involving an early form of a Brazilian wax in 18th century France, but the other character's response to it shows how unusual it was. Paying for a tan would also have seemed insane for centuries, not because people understood that a tan is actually a sign of skin damage that is increasing your chances of cancer and is absolutely nothing to strive for, but because it was a mark of a poor working person who had to do outdoor labour. Now, I'm not saying that personal grooming was a 20th century invention, because it really wasn't. The ancient Romans could go to the bathhouses and get a shave and a haircut, and you only have to look at old busts to see that the ladies had some incredible hairdos that they absolutely didn't do themselves, though given their slave economy they still didn't have to budget for hairdressers much of the time. Archaeologists have also found evidence of other grooming products used in the ancient world, such as hairpins and tweezers, and we know from the written records that they used oils to clean and moisturise their skin, things like soot, saffron, and ground up lapis lazuli to create eyeshadows and eyeliners, and flower petals to create perfumes. Just look at images of ancient Egyptians and you can tell that they were wearing makeup too. England also has a town which is literally called Bath because of its Roman baths, and if we move forward in history, we have Elizabeth I, who was famous for her extravagant wigs and white lead makeup, and the hair powder, rouge for the cheeks, and burnt cloves to make an eyebrow pencil that were all available in the early modern period as well. You can even see some of Queen Charlotte's pots and jars on her dressing room table here that would have contained such items. My point is not that personal grooming is new, therefore, but that compared to centuries gone by, it is much more widely indulged in now, as it is easily available to nearly every section of the population, whether male or female, lower, middle, or upper class. It also eats into people's budgets, as a percentage of their income, much more than it used to. For instance, the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the US shows a steadily increasing expenditure on personal care products and services, from $771 in 2021 to $866 in 2022 and $950 in 2023. Part of this increase may be attributed to inflation, but also to the fact that there are so many more ways to spend money in this category than ever before. No one was offering Elizabeth I highlights, perms, a spray tan, or acrylic nails. And of course, plastic surgery and cosmetic procedures like Botox and fillers did only arrive in the last century. When you look at the array of options available, is it really any wonder that the US beauty industry was worth $49 billion in 2022 and the British one £27.2 billion in 2023? If we'd been born prior to the 20th century and not liked our noses, for example, we'd have just had to live with it, while many people in the past will have cut or shaved their hair at home or had a family member do it. In fact, some still do, and I don't blame them. Nowadays, though, the temptation, if you can afford it, to just get something fixed, in inverted commas, is everywhere. Now, I'm not saying that personal grooming is bad. It's nice to look our best and feel good about ourselves, and I appreciate being able to colour my hair or put on some concealer whenever I've got a spot. But I do think that the amount of money some people will spend on sometimes dangerous cosmetic procedures, weird-looking haircuts, skincare that doesn't do much, and designer makeup is insane. And quite often they're just paying for the brand name and not because the product or service is of a higher quality than what can be bought elsewhere. I also don't think all the steps you sometimes hear recommended in a skincare regime are necessary. Like, I don't think you need to double cleanse if you just do your first and only cleanse properly. I don't use a specific eye cream anymore, and I don't think you need a toner, which is really just another serum, so I think encouraging you to use one is a bit scammy. Do you think our ancestors were going through all these steps? Because I sure don't. What I will say though before I finish this point is that I do wholeheartedly support the use of sunscreen. I remember hearing a doctor say once, it's like the closest thing to magic we've ever invented, because it literally puts a roadblock in front of cancer and aging. So do use a high factor SPF, people, and be generous with it on your skin. It'll be far more beneficial than all the cleansing, toner, eye creams and regular moisturizers out there, and if our ancestors had had access to it and been smart enough to use it, I bet they'd have loved it too. Number 5. Money charges. Nowadays, ironically, it costs money to have money, and I don't just mean in taxes, which have been around for a very long time. In the past, the system was in many ways much simpler. Though moneylenders can be traced back to antiquity, the first bank in the world, as we would recognise it today, was invented in 1472 in Siena, Italy, with big names like the Bank of England following in later years. It was founded in 1694, for instance. But banking didn't really take off until the 18th century, and most people weren't earning enough to warrant using one, and so avoided things like banking fees. My paternal grandfather was paid in cash, for instance, and just gave the money to my grandmother to run the house, minus what he needed for the week. And women weren't even allowed to open bank accounts in their own names in the UK until 1975. This is actually something I only learned whilst researching this video, and my mother didn't seem to have realised it, but when I asked her about opening her first bank account, it emerged that her boss went into the bank with her on her first day in that job and asked that she be allowed to open an account so that he could pay her wages. I had to break it to her that if he hadn't been there, she wouldn't have had that account. France and the US were ahead of us in this respect, by the way, having granted women this right in the 1880s and the 1960s, respectively. Credit cards were only invented in the 1950s, so there was no credit card debt before then, though of course you could go into debt in many other ways, and no one but the wealthiest was going to need to pay accountants or financial advisors, whereas nowadays, if you're self-employed in particular, and I speak from experience here, they're tough to do without. The thought of having to do my own tax return breaks me out in a cold sweat. Number 6. Anything plastic. Plastics, as we know them today, weren't invented until the 20th century, and until then, objects were typically made of things like metal, stone, wood, glass, or porcelain. They would usually be bought once and then used until they were absolutely done out and couldn't be upcycled into something else. Just take a look at the items sitting out in stately homes or on display in museums and you'll see what I mean. If they were packaged at all, they had to be in a solid box or wrapped up in paper or fabric. Cast an eye around your home or wherever you happen to be when you're watching or listening to this and think about how much plastic you're really looking at. Remember too that it'll even be in your clothes most of the time as well. Now ask yourself, how many of your belongings would simply disappear if plastic wasn't available? Number 7, eating out frequently. Frequently is the key word here. Now, eating food outside the home, which was prepared by someone else, is not new. There were tabernae in ancient Rome, which could sell food and drink. It's where the word tavern would ultimately come from. Restaurants in 12th century China, and coffee shops in the Ottoman Empire by the 15th century, and in Europe in the 17th. These places weren't frequented in anywhere near the same numbers as they are today, though. Some were just designed for travellers, and coffee shops were originally intended for men, with the exception of the women who worked there, and didn't offer the same range of products that you can get there now. Then, of course, there's mass-produced fast food, something unrecognisable to anyone living before the 20th century. Instead, rather than eating and drinking out on a frequent basis, more people in the past, and yes, this burden would have fallen more heavily on women, were able to cook and take care of themselves and their families inside the home, meaning they didn't have the expense of outside food and drink that many of us barely even think about anymore, but which was costing Americans an average of $3,933 each in 2023. This is obviously somewhere where we could make savings today by eating at home, using packed lunches at work or school, and or taking a flask of tea or coffee with us somewhere, rather than buying another drink from the likes of Costa, Starbucks or Nero's. Number 8. Wellness. The wellness industry is now absolutely huge and covers everything from gym memberships to exercise classes to spa days, therapy, life coaches, to the goop that Gwyneth Paltrow sells and tries to get you to shove up your unmentionables, and much more. Though some aspects of it can be found in ancient history, meditation and massages are nothing new for instance, the industry that has grown up around it today started in earnest in the 20th century. According to an article on JSTOR's blog, JSTOR is short for journal storage and it's where I get a lot of the academic articles I read for my videos, the term wellness was popularised in the late 1950s by Dr. Halbert L. Dunn, the so-called father of the movement. Prior to this, the closest thing to wellness expenses that most people would have been medical expenses, which is actually a little different as it was more about treating pre-existing ailments which were typically physical. So our ancestors did have doctors' fees if they could afford to hire a so-called doctor, and rudimentary dentists existed too, but you wouldn't have been paying for aesthetic or maintenance care like braces, fillings, and blood pressure and cholesterol checks, nor would you have been going to weekly yoga classes and checking in with your therapist. You'd have been going when you had pain or some other physical symptom, and even then, only if you could afford it. So actually not that unlike the US healthcare system today. Of course, there's a lot to be said for many of the ideas around modern wellness, and I don't want you to think I'm poo-pooing it all. I'm just saying that this isn't an expense that most people would have had or even been aware of prior to the 20th century, and there are ways to get many of the benefits of paid-for wellness experiences for free, like taking a walk instead of paying to use a treadmill in the gym. Number 9. A university education. This is something which has existed for many centuries in Europe, however primarily just for rich men, and so it's not something most would have had to budget for. In the modern world though, a university degree is much more common, and there was a window of time from the early to mid-1960s to 1998 when it was actually free in the UK, and the numbers going to university surged from just 3.4% of school leavers in 1950 to 19.3% in 1990. So my mother, who attended well before 1998, paid nothing to go, not even accommodation costs, because she got a free maintenance grant, which sounds so good you might think I'm lying, but I swear I'm not. I remember one of my friend's dads once telling us that he spent his on a set of speakers. I paid what now look like very modest fees for my undergrad, like what I paid in a year wouldn't get me through a semester nowadays, then quite a bit more for my MA and PhD, and since 2012, in parts of the UK at least, the fees have gone through the roof. For in that year, they basically trebled from £3,000 to £9,000 in England and Wales, and now stand at £9,250 and look set to rise again soon. In Scotland, though, its own citizens pay nothing thanks to higher taxes, and despite the fact that their degrees typically last 4 years instead of 3 like elsewhere in the UK. In Northern Ireland, it's now about £4,750 for local students. In the USA, I believe it's also ruinously expensive, though there does seem to be more variation there in fees paid, depending on what type of university you're at. An article on topuniversities.com, though, put it at up to $60,000 per year for the really expensive institutions, though there also appear to me to be more options for financial aid. So basically, prior to the latter half of the 20th century, in the UK at least, people weren't budgeting for university because it was too expensive. Then they weren't budgeting for it because it was free, and now we're back to it being ruinously expensive again, but it's now expected of many more people that they'll go anyway, which is really the worst situation of all. Number 10, fast fashion. I'm sure you were all wondering when I was going to mention this one, but I wanted to save one of the major and largely unnecessary expenses we now have that our ancestors didn't for last. In the past, clothes were meant to endure. They were an investment, not in the way that people talk about investment pieces now, where they mean you might get 10 years out of it if you're really, really good about your garment care and don't wear it too much, which rather defeats the point. No, what I mean is that clothes were meant to last multiple decades in the past, and when they couldn't then be handed on, mended, or recycled into other garments anymore, they would be used for things like patchwork quilts and dusters. People didn't have wardrobes, plural, full of clothes. They had what we would now call a capsule wardrobe, and that is why you will often see someone's clothes itemised in their will, because they had few enough items that they could actually do that. Only the uber wealthy had a lot of clothing, and even they reused it. See my video on Princess Charlotte's wedding dress for a great example of this, to hear about how that garment was repurposed over and over again, so that what we see today probably doesn't have very much material left in it that was actually worn by the princess on her wedding day. Clothing will also have been made from natural fibres like cotton, silk, linen and leather, and that and the ingrained desire to reuse and recycle are why so few garments survive from before the 19th century, and why those which do are so delicate. The idea of buying hundreds and hundreds of garments, wearing them only a few times, then dumping them and sending them out to landfill or giving up on them simply because they needed mended or altered would have struck horror in our ancestors, whose clothes were handmade rather than mass-produced and therefore represented a huge investment of time and energy. They had a lot more respect for their clothing, and while an individual piece may have cost more than what we'll blow on fast fashion today, it lasted so long and was so well used that it was a far better investment, not to mention being better for the planet because it didn't have plastic in it and so would biodegrade. So that's my list of 10 things we spent money on that our ancestors didn't, many of which we could actually survive without just fine, and were surviving without just fine until as recently as the early noughties. As promised, I'm going to tell you about one thing that many, not all, of our ancestors will have had to pay for that we now don't, and that is animal care. Now, I don't just mean your dog or your pet hamster, though vet fees can be wild. I mean having to keep horses, cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, and dogs and cats. Keeping them fed and sheltered in many cases was not a small expense, and in centuries gone by, when much more of the population were agrarian-based and aiming for a level of self-sufficiency that we don't have anymore, it was an expense that many more people had, and I don't just mean farmers. Lots of people would keep chickens in the garden, for instance, and the wealthier classes would need to maintain their own horses for the sake of travel. That involved feeding, shoeing and stabling the animals and paying staff members to care for them. So there you go. For those of us who aren't keen animal lovers, there is something to be said for modern life after all. Let me know in the comments below what expenses I missed or what modern life expense you think is the silliest. Please also remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel with notifications switched on if you haven't done so already. That way YouTube will let you know the next time I upload. You can also check out my website, historycallingofficial.com, where you can sign up to my free mailing list and get 2 complimentary downloads all about spotting good history books versus bad and how to interview family members about your family tree. It's linked below for you. To hear more about Princess Charlotte's wedding dress, here's that video I mentioned a minute ago. Or if that doesn't float your boat, then this other recommendation will be selected by YouTube based on your own viewer preferences. So if the algorithm's doing its job right, you should hopefully like the look of it. Whatever you choose, please enjoy, and until next time, keep learning.